There are two types of women in every room. One is confident, and one has learned to perform confidence. And this reminds me of that phrase from Maddie in Euphoria when she says, the thing about confidence is that you can always fake it and no one's gonna know. And yes, she is right, because these two types of people, they look almost identical until this one thing happens. And when it does, the difference is so immediate. You can see it in about 10 seconds if you know what you're looking for. So real confidence versus performed confidence. And I want to give you the framework that explains the difference today. Not as a way to judge other people, but as a way to understand yourself. Because most of the women I think about when I think about this topic are not in other people's rooms. They're in their own heads, and they wonder why they feel so exhausted after situations where, by all accounts, they showed up just fine. But here's the tell. It is not how someone enters a room. It is not how they speak in normal conditions. Performed confidence and real confidence sound very similar when nothing is at stake. But the tell is what happens in the 10 seconds after that uncomfortable thing lands. It's the pushback, the disagreement, and the ambiguous silence. And this moment where staying confident would require something, like saying something that might not land very well, or holding a position that everyone else is questioning, or staying fully present when the social pressure is telling you to hold back. The genuinely confident women hold. Their ground don't move. Not because she is rigid. She can be warm, she can be curious, and she can also listen, but the internal baseline does not shift. The performer, she recalibrates. She reads the room, and the performance flickers. You can see it if you're watching for it, and once you've seen it in yourself or in someone else, you will not be able to unsee it. If you go back to my first video on this channel, the one about why confident women go quiet, I talk about the shrink reflex and how your body freezes in these very important moments. That video was about that one specific moment, but this video is going to be about what happens when that moment becomes a pattern. Because for a lot of ambitious women, the response to the shrink reflex was not to address what was underneath it, but just to learn what it looks like to someone who doesn't have confidence, to become a very good performer of confidence. And that strategy worked well enough that it kept going until the cost of running it started to outrun the benefits. So yes, Maddie was right, but in the short term, not in the long term. This is explained by psychology. This is not me making stuff up. This is Mark Schneider in 1970s who explained a concept called self-monitoring. And what it is, in plain words, is that this degree to which a person regulates their behavior. And this is based on what the social situation seems to call for versus what they're actually feeling internally. People that are high self-monitors, they are socially skilled. They can read rooms quickly, they can adapt quickly, and they can give people what the situation seems to need. And they are genuinely impressive to be around because they have finally tuned social intelligence. But here's the thing about these people, that when you use it to perform a psychological state that you don't actually have, confidence being the most common one, something very specific happens. The performance works, and it works because you keep running it, but over time the performance becomes the default, and your actual state, that was the real you, who's uncertain, unpolished, and unpresent, they start to feel more and more risky to let out your true self. And this gap between how confident you appear and how confident you actually feel is where the performance gap is. And it's not just a social cause, it is costing you energy. And it is an identity cause, and understanding all three of these is what changes everything. So let me be precise about what the performance gap actually is, because I think this vague version of this idea is all over the place and it doesn't help anyone. Let's say you're in a situation, in a conversation, a meeting, anything, and you have really high performance pressure where your confidence is what is going to reward you. Then something in you suddenly activates, and it's not genuine ease, but a performance of ease. You're pretending to feel confident. You have learned what confidence looks like, so that is what you're pretending to do. You're articulating your voice, you hold eye contact, just the right amount, and you choose words that show certainty when you don't feel it, and then you do it. People read you as confident, and everyone's reaction to you is exactly how you wanted it to be. And yes, I will say you have developed this skill, and I want to be clear about that. What I'm describing is a genuine form of social intelligence, and it served you. It got you through situations that would have been so much harder if you had shown up uncertain of yourself. So why should you care about this gap? Every time you run the performance gap, you create this small internal record that the real me is not safe here. This performance act is what works, and over enough time and enough rooms, the performed me is the version that is acceptable. The real me needs to be managed. The performance gap is not the distance between who you are and who you pretend to be. It is the distance between who you are and who you have convinced yourself you need to be. And that is a very lonely gap and a very expensive gap. Take 10 seconds to think to yourself about the last time something uncomfortable happened in a social setting or in a professional setting, and the disagreement, a pushback, or even a heavy moment of silence. What did you do after that time? Did you hold your ground? Did you stay present? Or did you recalibrate? Or did you shrink yourself to something that was more manageable and it helped you reduce the social stress? And if that is what you did, that is the performance gap. That is not a weakness, that is the gap running its program. And once you can see it in real time, you have something you did not have before, which is a choice. And the cost of all of this is what you may be overlooking because it requires constant fuel. You're not just showing up, you're running on a monitoring system all the time, reading the room for feedback, changing your output based on what is going on, checking where what you're doing is working or not, adjusting yourself, and maintaining that appearance of ease while the actual work is happening underneath you, and it is subconsciously always going on. And that is exhausting, not in a dramatic way, in a low grade, chronic, I need to decompress after every social setting. And why am I so tired? I don't have social battery. Why do I replay conversations after trying to work out if I came across okay? All of these thoughts are the post-situation audit. This is a performance gap symptom. A genuine confidence does not require this audit because it is not a performance that needs to be reviewed. It is a constant state, and states do not require energy to maintain in the way performance does. Think about the people in your life that you would actually call confident. Not a loud person, not really an impressive person, but someone who is just steady, who doesn't seem to need the room to validate what they're doing or what they're saying. They don't replay conversations in their head afterward. They hold their stand without requiring anyone to agree with them. And that steadiness is not a personality type. It is something some people have and others simply do not. It is the absence of a performance, and the absence of performance is only possible when the underlying state is real enough and no performance is needed. This lack of social battery and exhaustion that you feel is not a weakness, it is a cost of the performance gap. And naming it correctly changes how you relate to it because you stop trying to perform better, you start asking yourself a completely different question. The third layer of the performance gap, the one that I think is the most important, it's not social, it's not energy, it is your identity. And this performance is costing you your identity. What happens when you run a performance for a long enough time is that the performance starts to feel like the only version of you that is socially acceptable. And the actual you, the one who doesn't always feel certain, that has doubts and that is still figuring things out and is not performing at ease. That version starts to feel dangerous and unacceptable. Like you need to manage something, and over time you become a stranger to yourself in the rooms that matter the most. Not because you're inauthentic as a person, but because the self-monitor that is supposed to help you navigate rooms, it has started to prevent you from actually being in the room. And that is a performance gap at its absolute worst. And it is not something other people see. It is something you feel. It is the quiet awareness that the version of you getting through the situation is not that quiet version of you that actually exists. And this gap between who you are in the room and who you are when no one is watching, that is the cost. And that compounds over time in a way that has nothing to do with individual situations and everything to do with how you understand yourself. So I want to give you 3 things to work with. This is not a fix, but this is just a diagnostic, okay? Let's call it that. The way to start seeing the performance gap clearly enough to make choices about it rather than just running automatically is first the 10-second tell test. Next time something uncomfortable lands in a conversation, just notice what happens to you in that 10 seconds after. Do you hold your ground? Do you recalibrate? You do not have to change what you do. Just observe and notice what happens. And that noticing itself is the first step. Then second, you do the cost audit. Where in your life are you most exhausted after showing up? What drains your social battery the most? Which relationship, which room, which situation drain your fuel the most? That answer will tell you exactly where the performance gap is the widest. And that is where the real work eventually needs to happen. The last thing is the origin question. When did you first learn that performing was safer than being yourself? Not as a therapy question, but as a practical question. What was that environment that taught you the real you was not accepted and it needed to be managed? Because the performance gap obviously didn't come out of nowhere. It was a rational response that you had to a specific context, and understanding this context is what will eventually lead you to update yourself. So what does all this mean for you? This means that this exhaustion that you feel is a sign that you're working harder than the people around you realize, and harder than you should have to. And it means that the women that you watch for their confidence, they're not running a performance that you haven't learned yet. They stopped performing. And that is a different concept. And you cannot get there by becoming a better performer. You'll get there by performing less. And real confidence is not something you perform until you feel it. It is something you stop performing long enough to find out that it was always there. And understanding, naming, and seeing all of this it doesn't mean that you tell yourself you're broken. It is a map of the strategy that you develop that helped you in one context and is now costing you in other future contexts. But because we know that maps are useful, maps will show you where you are. And they show you. If you look at them clear enough, you can see where you can go instead. So here's the three things I gave you in this video. The 10-second tell test, the cost audit, and the origin question. And those are the layers of a much larger framework that I have been building around this performance gap. And what the diagnostic layer tells you is where you are. It does not yet tell you how to move from performed confidence to genuine confidence. That is a different, more involved conversation. But here's what I want you to know, that the women who have done that work, who have closed this performance gap, not by performing better, but by performing less, they don't describe it as being more confident. They just say that they're more themselves. And that difference is what I'm talking about. When you hear people say, just be you, this is what it is. So this is a conversation I want to keep building, so subscribe if this is the conversation you want to experience as it develops. If this is the first video you have seen from my channel, then go watch the other one on why confident women go quiet, and it is the foundation of what I've been building in this series. But one last reminder, real confidence is not something you perform until you feel it. It is something you stop performing long enough to find out that it was always there.